My name is Shirley Carson. I'm 31 years old. And this is the story of the night I walked into my parents' house for a simple family dinner. And walked out knowing I would never see them the same way again. It started like so many other evenings, with the kind of small talk and careful politeness you adopt when the relationship is strained. I'd been invited for dinner, just the family, my mom had said on the phone, and despite the heavy silence that had hung over us for weeks, I told myself this was a good sign, a chance to mend things. Fresh start, maybe. By the time I arrived, the house smelled faintly of roasted chicken and buttered potatoes. The table was set neatly, almost formally, with cloth napkins and polished silverware. My seat at the far end had already been pulled out for me, a glass of cranberry juice waiting like an old habit preserved in amber. My mom's voice floated from the kitchen. "You still like cranberry, right?" she asked with a quick smile that didn't quite touch her eyes. I nodded automatically, even though I hadn't touched the stuff in months. It wasn't the kind of night where I wanted to explain myself. My dad stood up as I walked into the dining room, a beat too slow, like he couldn't decide if we were doing hugs or sticking to nods. We ended up settling for the nods. My younger sister sat at the table, thumbs dancing over her phone screen, barely glancing up before dropping her gaze again. She'd perfected that teenage disinterest long ago. And apparently, she'd carried it into adulthood like a cherished heirloom. We sat down together, exchanging easy, surface-level conversation. "How's work? Still in the same apartment? Traffic's been awful lately." I answered with small smiles, nodded at the right moments, even chuckled politely when my sister recounted some story about a coworker getting stuck in a revolving door. It wasn't funny, but I knew my role in this family. The quiet one, the reliable one, the one who didn't stir the pot. Halfway through my dad's familiar rant about road construction, my phone buzzed under the table. Without thinking, I glanced at it. A new message. No contact name. No emojis. No unnecessary punctuation. Just a short, sharp command. "Get up and leave now. Don't say anything to your parents." I froze. The sounds of clinking cutlery and the low hum of conversation seemed to fade into the background. My eyes scanned the message again, trying to make sense of it. Maybe it was a prank. A wrong number. Scam. Or maybe, and this thought chilled me, maybe it wasn't. I excused myself with a casual, "Just need to use the bathroom," and slipped upstairs. The upstairs bathroom had a door that locked without jamming, and I needed that privacy. I sat on the edge of the tub, staring at the message until my thumb hovered over the call button. The voice that answered after one ring was low and urgent. "You're still there. Who is this?" I asked. "It's Mark. My sister's on again, off again boyfriend. Listen, you need to leave. Don't drink anything. Just get out." My eyes flicked to the memory of that untouched cranberry juice downstairs. "Why?" A pause. "I think they put something in it. Alcohol, maybe something else. They want you to pass out." My stomach nodded. I hadn't taken a sip yet. "Why would they?" "To get into your phone," he said flatly. "Use your fingerprint." The room seemed to tilt slightly, though I knew it was just the rush of adrenaline. I pressed for more answers, but Mark wouldn't give them. "Just trust me, Shirley. Leave. Now." When the call ended, I sat there in the silence, the cold from the bathroom tiles creeping through my clothes. The rational part of my brain whispered that it was insane, that my parents would never do something like this. But another part of me, the part that had learned over years of subtle exploitation and boundary crossing, knew better. I'd spent a lifetime playing the fixer, the provider, the one who gave and gave until there was nothing left to take. I'd been the sister who just happened to cover my siblings' mistakes. The daughter who could be counted on to help, no matter the cost. And lately, the refusal to keep playing that role had left me exiled in my own family. And now I was supposed to believe this was just another nice family dinner? I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror, my expression calm, but my heartbeat drumming hard against my ribs. I knew one thing for sure. Whatever game they thought they were playing tonight, I wasn't going to lose. I stayed in the bathroom long enough for the steam on the mirror to fade and my heartbeat to slow into something I could steer. The text sat on my screen like a lit match on a dry table. I wanted to believe it was paranoia, a prank, anything but what it implied. But the truth was simpler. I knew my family's patterns, and I knew how far they'd stretch the meaning of love when it suited them. Tonight, I wasn't going to be their pattern. I opened my banking app in settings like I was tying my hair back before a fight. Face ID and fingerprint stayed on exactly as they expected, because the easiest way to catch a thief is to let them try the door you already bolted. What I changed was everything behind that front door. I'd already shifted my accounts to hardware-based codes months ago, the kind that don't text you a 6-digit number, but spin silently in an authenticator that can't be mirrored. Tonight I tightened the screws. Transaction limits to 0 without code, new device approvals off, alerts to my work email and a vault address. I toggled the recorder in my pocket. No red, no banner, no conspicuous waveform, just a quiet app one used for interviews at work, set to capture background audio when the screen was off. One-party consent state. I'd looked it up a long time ago when I needed to protect myself during a performance review. I wasn't here to entrap anyone. I was here to remember precisely what was done to me. When I finally unlocked the door, the hallway looked exactly as it always had. A framed school photo of my sister with a crooked smile, a scuff on the baseboard from a moving box years ago, the faint hum of the attic fan. Familiarities that braided themselves into trust. Only trust had been a currency in this house for longer than money, bartered and pawned until it lost its shape. I tucked my phone in my back pocket and rehearsed my one-line script. I'm fine. I just needed a minute. Downstairs, my mother's smile found me like a porch light. Everything okay? She asked with practiced concern, pivoting effortlessly from the stove. My dad was still mid-sentence about a detour on a 94. My sister, Tessa, finally looked up from her phone and squinted as if she'd missed a crucial plot twist. Fine, I said, taking my seat. The glass of cranberry waited, garnet and innocent. You should drink while it's cold, my mom chirped, which would have sounded motherly if her eyes hadn't cut to Tessa and then to my dad in a blink-fast relay. 3 people, 1 choreography. I felt the edge of my phone against my spine, a small rectangle that held more of me than any blood relation in that room. I lifted the glass, let it kiss my lip, and tipped it as if I were swallowing. The tart smell rose like a memory of childhood summers, when my biggest betrayal was losing a board game because I'd let Tessa skip a square. I set the glass down, swallowed nothing, and smiled. Still tart, I said. Like always. Dinner resumed, the theater of normalcy so convincing that if it weren't for the electricity crawling under my skin, I might have bought a ticket. We talked about gas prices and a neighbor's new mailbox. My dad complained about a ridiculous permit fee, while the most expensive thing on the table was the silence. After a few minutes I leaned down, pretending my napkin had fallen. The glass followed me under the table's edge, and with a slow wrist I let a ribbon of crimson slip into the shadowed carpet between chair legs. Not all of it, just enough to tell a story later if anyone decided to believe it. When I re-emerged, I pressed my fingers to my temple. You okay? Tessa asked, voice a little too bright. Headache, I murmured. Maybe I stood up too fast upstairs. You don't eat enough, my mother said automatically, the kind of comment you make when you're trying to sound like you're caring instead of calculating. Lie down, my dad suggested, already clearing a space on the couch with that brisk efficiency he reserved for broken appliances and minor domestic nuisances. 10 minutes. We'll save dessert. I let them guide me, soft hands and soft tones, the kind you use with a child you're coaxing to sleep. The couch smelled like laundry detergent in February. Someone draped a throw over my legs. I turned on my side and let my breathing find a rhythm I rehearsed in college when I pulled all-nighters and didn't want my roommate to know. Slow in, slower out. The world narrowed to the velour under my cheek and the whispering at the edge of hearing. Is she out? My mother asked, so close I could have counted the spearmint on her breath. She's out, Tessa said quickly, and I heard the whine of my phone sliding free of denim. A second later, the hushed click that passes for a moral boundary in this house. Open, my dad whispered, not to me but to my thumb. They raised my hand like it belonged to them. A soft pressure, a pause, the haptic kiss of success. I felt my pulse drum against the weight in the room. They didn't apologize. They didn't flinch. They worked. That's it, Tessa breathed, absorbed already by the glow. Okay, banking, she keeps her routing in the notes. Wait, no, she moved it. She saves everything, my dad muttered. She's organized. Organized as in convenient. Organized as in harvest ready. Not all of it, my mother said, her voice thicker, pragmatic. We just need enough to settle this. The rest she'll never notice. Settle what? The word slid like a glass bead across a tile floor. Quiet, untraceable, easy to lose. I kept my breathing steady and watched the memory of a different dinner unspool behind my closed eyes. The one where they told me Tessa needed help. No details, just urgency. And then when I demanded specifics, the truth came out messily. Gambling losses, a pitch she insisted was temporary and everyone agreed was my responsibility. I had said no. They had decided that was a temporary condition too. There's a verification, Tessa whispered, tension clipping her words. Two-step. She changed it. My father made that small, annoyed sound he reserves for commercials that come on too loud. Try another one. Same thing. The tapping quickened, frantic fingers skating from app to app like stones skipping on a black lake. Everything's locked. Pause heavy enough to feel. Then my mother's voice, practical and cool. Put it back. We'll figure it out. The phone returned to the cushion with the same care you give something you plan to steal later. Someone tucked the throw up to my shoulder, and the air in the room changed from criminal to domestic in one breath. My eyelids fluttered once, the way a person's do when they're leaving a thin sleep. I blinked, lifted my head a fraction, and squinted at the dim television I'd insisted we don't need. Sorry, I mumbled. I think I'm just wiped. You work too hard, my dad said, which was funny in the way a bruise is funny, unexpected and dark. I'm going to head out, I said, sitting up slowly, sliding my phone into my purse without looking at it, like it hadn't been pressed into service against me. Early morning. They offered the lines you offer when a lovely evening ends. Thanks for coming. Get home safe. Text when you arrive. The hug sequence happened automatically, mother, father, sister, like we were decades of muscle memory away from what had just happened. My mother's perfume was floral. My father's jacket was scratchy wool. Tessa's hair brushed my cheek. 3 normal things I would not let be normal again. Outside, the air felt cleaner than I remembered. A thinner, sharper cold that belonged to me. I unlocked my car and sat with my hands on the wheel for a full minute, my breath fogging the windshield in small rhythmic puffs. My phone vibrated once in my purse. An email ping from my vault, a record of a blocked transaction attempt timestamped at the exact moment the carpet had been drinking cranberry. Another ping. Audio file saved. I exhaled slowly, an answer to a question I hadn't let myself ask in words. Was I imagining it? No, I was not. I drove away like I drive home from work any other Tuesday. Steady speed. Signal on time. Tires combing the familiar crack in the street at the end of the block. I kept expecting to shake or cry or pull over and lean my head against the wheel. None of that came. What came instead was an odd level quiet, the kind that follows the worst kind of storm. Not relief exactly, but a clean horizon. At the next light, I thought about Tessa, about the way she used to drape herself over the couch and beg for the remote, about the glitter pens and pizza slices I bought with my allowance because, "You're the older one, be generous." I thought about the day she told me she was interviewing at a firm downtown, about the gloss on her lip and the way she framed her future as a series of doors she would be escorted through. I thought about the phone call 3 weeks ago. $12,000, no explanation, my parents speaking like debt collectors, not parents. I thought about the silence when I said no, their favorite punishment when fury wasn't practical. At the following intersection, I thought about Mark. He and Tessa were a revolving door of status updates. Together, not together. Each post accompanied by a filtered photo and a caption about growth. He had always seemed mild, cautious, a man who preferred the comfortable middle. And yet his voice on the phone had been a wire pulled tight. Did he see something? A text thread? A bottle at the back of a cabinet? Was he in the house earlier? I didn't know. I only knew he had said, "Don't drink. Leave." And he had been right. By the time the glow of the precinct sign rose at the end of the block, my decision had finished making itself. Reporting them wasn't vengeance. It was record-keeping. It was saying, I will not let the story be that I misunderstood dinner. I pulled into a space under the street lamp, turned off the engine, and sat there long enough to hear the cooling tick of the hood. In the glass doors, I was a reflection with a coat and a purpose. Inside, the lobby was fluorescent and ordinary. A man arguing about a parking ticket, a bulletin board with community warnings, a plastic fern. The woman at the window looked up and gave me the kind of neutral kindness you give strangers late at night. "How can I help you?" I need to report a crime, I said, my voice the calmest I'd ever heard it. I have evidence. She nodded, slid a clipboard forward that I didn't need, then buzzed a door. A uniformed officer appeared, his expression patient in a way that made me want to sit down. This way, he said, and I followed him into a small room with a table, 2 chairs, and a clock that ticked honestly. I set my phone on the table like a witness taking the stand. For a second I saw my mother's hands again, gentle, practiced, guiding my thumb. I saw my father's focus sharpen around an account number that wasn't his. I saw my sister's face lit by the blue of a screen that had never been hers to enter. I pressed play. The room filled with the living proof of what I already knew. Footsteps. Whispers. The rasp of a blanket. My father's voice low and intent, my mother's practical, my sister's fingers tapping. The officer listened without interrupting, eyes flicking to the time code every so often, a habit that told me he did this for a living. When it ended, the silence felt clean again. Do you know who these individuals are? He asked, a question strung on protocol. Yes, I said. My parents. My sister. He met my eyes. Do you understand what they were attempting to do? Take my money, I answered. Drug me to do it. Use my finger to pretend I said yes. The clock ticked once, twice. He nodded. Okay, he said. Let's get this recorded properly. As he started typing, I thought about the way habit can feel like love when you squint, the way obligation can dress itself as generosity, the way a glass of cranberry can be just a drink until it's not. I sat up straighter. The horizon was still clean. Tonight I wasn't the quiet one who didn't stir the pot. Tonight I named what boiled. Outside that small room, my family's house stood serene in its cul-de-sac, a porch light on, a casserole cooling in the fridge, the stain in the carpet darkening into a story. Inside the station, the story I had lived turned into something you could print and sign. Neither of those things would save what used to be us. But they would save me. And for the first time since my phone buzzed beneath the table, I didn't feel like I was about to fall. I felt like I had finally stood up. The interview at the station didn't end with any dramatic flourish. There was no slamming of folders or ominous promises of justice. The officer, whose name tag read H. Ramirez, typed steadily, occasionally clarifying a detail, the exact time I'd received the text, whether I'd touched the cranberry juice, how long the attempt on my phone lasted. It was clinical, methodical, the opposite of the chaos I'd just come from. When he finished, he read my statement back to me word for word and I signed it. The pen felt heavier than it should have. Like I was not just signing a piece of paper, but severing the last frayed thread that tethered me to my family. He handed me a carbon copy. We'll open an investigation immediately, he said. You've given us a lot to work with. I nodded, my throat dry. What happens now? For now, nothing changes on your end, except your safety protocols, he replied. You've already done most of it. Changed your bank security, recorded evidence, blocked contact. If they try anything again, you call us immediately. But with this recording, he glanced down at my phone, the faintest curve of a smirk on his lips. I don't think they'll be so bold. I didn't stay to ask what they'd do when the reality sank in for my parents and Tessa. I didn't care if it was an arrest, a warning, or something in between. I left the station like I just walked out of a long exam. The kind where you're not sure if you passed, but you know you answered every question honestly. The air outside was cold and sharp, biting at the tip of my nose, but it felt cleaner than anything I'd breathed in that house. The drive home was a blur of streetlights and empty intersections. My mind kept replaying little things I hadn't noticed before. The too fast glance my mom had given Tessa at the dinner table, the way my dad's hand had hovered near my glass like he was making sure I'd taken a sip. Even the warmth of the blanket they draped over me felt sinister in hindsight, like tucking in a patient they were eager to see unconscious. When I got home, I double-checked the locks, then set my phone face down on the kitchen counter. My apartment was exactly as I'd left it. Dishes drying in the rack, a plant on the windowsill that needed watering, a stack of unopened mail by the door. I stood there for a long time, letting the stillness wash over me. No one asking for money. No one hovering for access to something that was mine. No one pretending they loved me while scheming behind my back. It wasn't until I stepped into the shower that the reality of it all hit me. The steam blurred the tiles and I found myself leaning against the wall, my palms pressed flat against the wet ceramic. My own family had planned to drug me, to rob me, To do it while smiling, while asking me about traffic and work and whether I still liked cranberry juice. And the worst part? I wasn't surprised. I thought about Mark again, about his tense voice on the phone. What had he seen to make him break ranks with Tessa? Had she bragged about the plan, assuming he'd keep it between them? Or had he stumbled across it by accident? A half-heard conversation? An unlocked text thread? Whatever it was, it had been enough for him to warn me. By the time I crawled into bed, my exhaustion wasn't just physical. It was the kind of bone-deep weariness that comes from realizing you've been right about something ugly for years, and now you have proof. I slept like I was defending a fortress, light, restless, my phone within arm's reach. The next 2 days were quiet. No calls, no texts. I went to work, came home, and tried to focus on anything but the ticking clock of what I'd set in motion. But on the third day it started. 3 missed calls from my mom before noon. 2 from my dad. A voicemail from Tessa, her voice trembling between anger and desperation. Surely it was a mistake. You didn't have to make it worse. We could have talked about it. I played it twice, noting the way she skipped over what it was. No apology. No admission. Just an attempt to recast themselves as the ones who'd been wronged. Then came my dad's voicemail. You think the cops will fix this? You're going to destroy everything. You don't do this to your own people. I almost laughed at that, your own people. As if blood alone erased intent. As if the fact that we shared DNA meant they could invade my privacy, try to take my money, and expect me to keep their secret. I sent one text back to the group thread. Just one. You drugged me. You tried to rob me. That's not family. That's a felony. Then I blocked them. Mom, Dad, Tessa, the family group chat. Every single contact that could link back to them. I changed my phone number, updated my work and friends, and set up a spam filter just in case they tried to reach me through fake numbers. And just like that, the line was drawn. I thought cutting them off would hurt more, that I'd spend nights staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'd done the right thing. Instead, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, free. But freedom, I would soon find out, has a way of drawing attention. And there were still consequences waiting in the wings. Not for me, but for them. Because when the police finished what they'd started that night, my parents and Tessa would learn the one lesson they'd never expected. You can only take from someone for so long before they decide to take everything back. The first sign that the police had moved forward came in the most mundane way possible, through a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. It was a Thursday evening, and I was halfway through reheating leftover pasta when my phone buzzed with a text from Denise. We weren't close. She was on my dad's side of the family and usually only reached out for holiday potlucks or the occasional mass-forwarded meme. Hey, I don't know what's going on, but there are police cars outside your parents' place. I froze, spoon suspended above the pot. My stomach clenched with a strange, conflicting mix of dread and validation. I typed back quickly. Do you know why? Her reply came a minute later. No idea. 2 officers went in. They were in there for a while. Then I saw them leave with a few folders and, I think maybe a laptop? I set the phone down on the counter and gripped the edge until my knuckles whitened. The recording, the bank logs, my statement, I'd known they were enough to start a case. But actually hearing that officers had been inside that house, handling evidence, made it real in a way that nothing else had yet. I imagined my mom's face when she opened the door to find them there. Would she have tried to play the gracious host? Would my dad have demanded to know what this was all about? Would Tessa have just stayed upstairs, pretending not to hear? I pictured all of it, the practiced smiles curdling into panic when they realized this wasn't a misunderstanding they could talk me out of. That night I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their dining table, the cranberry juice, the flick of my mom's glance toward my dad. But underneath that replay was something else. The sound of my own voice telling Officer Ramirez, they drugged me and tried to rob me. I hadn't stammered. I hadn't softened the edges. And now it was in the system. 2 days later, the news came directly from the detective handling my case. I was sitting at my desk at work when my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Miss Carson, a male voice said. This is Detective Owens. I'm calling to update you on your report from last week. I swallowed. Okay. Based on the evidence you provided, the audio recording, the transaction logs, and the witness statement from Mr. Mark Rivers, we've charged your parents and sister with attempted fraud, biometric data misuse, and conspiracy. We're also adding administration of a substance without consent, though the lab will confirm the specifics once we test the liquid sample we collected from your carpet. It took me a second to realize I was holding my breath. You collected a sample? Yes. The stain was still fresh enough when our team arrived. We sent it to the lab. His tone was matter-of-fact, professional. They've all been served with notices. They'll be appearing in court next month. In the meantime, you're under no obligation to have contact with them. In fact, I recommend you don't. I let out a slow exhale. I wasn't planning to. After the call ended, I just sat there, staring at my computer screen, the cursor blinking on an unfinished email. The reality settled in layers. They were officially charged. There would be a court date. And whatever story they told themselves about me being dramatic or overreacting had just been stripped away by a legal record. That evening, I got the first ripple of fallout. A mutual acquaintance, not quite a friend, but someone who hovered in the extended social web, messaged me on Facebook. Hey, your sister just lost her job. Saw her outside the finance building on 5th. She was crying. What happened? I didn't answer. What was I supposed to say? That she'd gambled away her savings, planned to steal from me to cover the debt, and then lost the job she'd leveraged my past help to get? That the tears she was shedding now were nothing compared to the years of slow, steady exploitation she'd orchestrated with my parents? I closed the message and sat in silence for a long time. Not out of guilt, that was gone now, but out of something sharper. A recognition. For the first time in years, I had the upper hand. Not because I wanted to ruin them, but because I had finally stopped letting them ruin me. In the weeks that followed, I learned more than I wanted to. From whispers through the family grapevine, I found out they'd sold the house. For debt and legal fees. As someone delicately put it, my dad had taken a warehouse job on the outskirts of town. My mom had been spotted working part-time at a boutique. A far cry from the woman who used to boast about being above retail. And Tessa? Well, no one seemed to know exactly where she'd landed. Except me. One afternoon, while running errands on the other side of the city, I turned into the grocery store parking lot and spotted her. She was wearing a company vest, hair tied back in a messy bun, scanning barcodes at the self-checkout station. She didn't see me, or maybe she did and just kept her gaze fixed on the register screen. I stood there for a moment, my basket hanging loosely in my hand, taking in the sight. This was the same sister who had once laughed in my face when I told her I couldn't keep covering her expenses. The same sister who had leaned over my unconscious body, or what she thought was unconscious, and whispered about how I always blacked out after a drink. I didn't say a word. I walked past, bought my groceries, and left. That night I realized something important. I didn't need revenge beyond this. I didn't need to see them punished any more than they already had been. The truth had already done what I never could. But the story wasn't over yet. Because there was one final step I hadn't taken. A step that would make sure they could never, under any circumstances, come near me or my life again. And I was ready to take it. The idea came to me late one night, long after the house had gone quiet and the city outside my window had settled into its muted hum. I was lying in bed, scrolling aimlessly through an article about fraud prevention, when a line jumped out at me. Legal protections are only as strong as the boundaries you enforce. I'd already cut them off emotionally. The criminal charges had created a wall in the legal system. But walls can be breached if you leave the gate unlocked. I knew my parents, and I knew Tessa, well enough to understand that time and consequences wouldn't necessarily mean they'd stay away. They'd already proven they were willing to cross every moral line to get to my money. If they ever got desperate enough, they might try again. And I wasn't going to give them that chance. The next morning, I made an appointment with a lawyer. She was a sharp, composed woman named Angela Pierce, with neatly tied back hair and an expression that told you she didn't waste words. We sat in her office, the city skyline framed behind her desk, as I laid out the entire story. Not just the attempted theft, but the years of financial manipulation before it, the slow erosion of boundaries disguised as family responsibility. When I finished, Angela tapped her pen against her notepad. "You've already done most of the heavy lifting," she said. "Criminal charges, documented evidence, a no-contact order through probation. But if you want to ensure they can't so much as sniff around your accounts or your personal life, we can take it further. How far? I asked. Civil protective order, she replied. In addition to the criminal no-contact terms, broader in scope, covers not just physical proximity, but also third-party contact, digital harassment, financial inquiries, anything that could be construed as trying to gain access to you or your assets. Can that hold up? With the evidence you've got? Absolutely. We spent the next 2 hours going through everything I'd kept, the messages, the voicemail transcripts, the bank alerts, the recording. Angela's eyebrows rose slightly when she heard my mother's voice on the audio, all softness as she asked if I was asleep, followed by my father's curt instructions to do this quickly. This, she said, tapping her nail against the phone screen, is why they're not going to fight you on it. They know they'll lose. 2 weeks later, the order was granted. It was more than a piece of paper. It was a legal perimeter around my life. They couldn't contact me directly, indirectly, digitally, or through anyone we knew in common. They couldn't come within 100 yards of my home or workplace. They couldn't request information from my bank or my employer. Violating any part of it meant immediate arrest. The day I got the signed order, I walked out of the courthouse into a pale winter sun. I stood on the steps for a moment, letting the cold air fill my lungs, and realized that for the first time in my adult life, there was no tether, no invisible string they could yank to pull me back into their chaos. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a glass of water and my phone. I opened my contacts and deleted the last remaining numbers that had any tie to them, distant relatives, old neighbors, anyone who could be used as a back channel. Then I logged into my bank and updated my alert settings again, this time routing them to an encrypted email they'd never know existed. It was over. But closure isn't always clean. A week later, I got one last ripple of their downfall, not from them but from Mark. He called from a number I didn't recognize, and when I answered, his voice was careful. Hey, it's Mark. I didn't know if you'd pick up. I almost hung up, but something in his tone stopped me. What do you want? I just wanted to tell you I'm sorry, he said. I didn't mean to drag you into their mess. I didn't know they'd take it that far. You knew enough to warn me, I said. Yeah, he admitted. I overheard them talking about it a couple days before. I thought it was just some twisted joke at first. Then I saw your mom with the bottle. I couldn't not say something. There was a pause on the line, the sound of him exhaling. They think I betrayed them. Tessa hasn't spoken to me since. I didn't bother telling him that was probably the best thing that could have happened to him. Instead, I said, you might have saved me. Good, he replied simply. Then it was worth it. We hung up without any promises to stay in touch. It didn't feel necessary. We both knew the part he'd played, and that was enough. From then on, my life became startlingly quiet. No late-night calls asking for help. No carefully phrased texts designed to guilt me into opening my wallet. No tension coiling in my stomach at the sound of my phone buzzing. And in that silence, I realized something else. I'd been living in survival mode for so long that I didn't know what it felt like to actually live. I intended to find out. But first, there was one last message I needed to send, not to them but to myself. A reminder of what I'd survived. I didn't write the message in my phone. I didn't even type it on my laptop. I bought a small leather-bound journal, the kind that smells faintly of new paper and glue, and I wrote it by hand, the way you commit something to memory, not just with words, but with the weight of the pen pressing into the page. You survived this because you trusted yourself. You saw through their smiles, their careful tones, their pretend love. You acted when it would have been easier to freeze. Never forget that. I tore the page out and taped it inside my bedroom closet, right at eye level, a place I'd see it every morning. A reminder that I could be my own safety net. The weeks that followed were quiet, almost unnervingly so. I went to work. I came home. I cooked for myself and only myself, opened my fridge and knew every single thing inside it was mine. I didn't realize until then how much mental space they'd occupied, how much of my daily energy had been spent anticipating their next ask, their next manipulation. The absence of that weight felt light. But one evening, as winter finally gave way to the first hints of spring, I got a text from an unfamiliar number. You think you've won? No name. No context. Just those 4 words. I stared at it, my pulse quickening. It could have been anyone. A scam or a wrong number. But my gut knew. I didn't reply. I screenshotted it, emailed it to Angela, and then to Detective Owens. Both responded within the hour. Do not engage, Angela wrote. It's a violation of the protective order if it's them. We'll document it. Owens called me directly. We'll look into where it came from. You did the right thing not to answer. For the rest of the night I kept my phone on the counter, the screen face down, as if turning it away could dull the sharp edge of those words. But the truth was they didn't scare me the way they might have months ago. Back then I would have been up all night, my thoughts racing through what they might do next. Now I had the law, evidence, and distance on my side. If anything, that text felt like proof they were still scrambling, still grasping for control they no longer had. 3 days later, Owens called again. We traced the number, he said. It was purchased under an alias, but security footage from the store matches your sister. We're filing it as a violation of the order. Will she be arrested? I asked. That'll be up to the court, but it won't help her probation. A strange calm settled over me after that call. Not glee, not satisfaction, just confirmation. They couldn't even follow the simplest rule. Stay away. And every time they tried to cross that line, they were only building a stronger case for why that line needed to exist. It was in that calm that I started making changes, small at first, then bigger. I updated my resume. I reached out to an old friend about a job opening in a different city. I even toured an apartment 2 hours away, one with tall windows and a kitchen that caught the morning light. It wasn't just about leaving the physical space they'd once had access to. It was about stepping fully into a life where my choices weren't shaped by fear of their reaction. And yet, before I left, I decided to take one last, deliberate action. Not revenge, I didn't need that anymore. This was something quieter, cleaner. I pulled up the recording on my phone, the one from that night. I saved it to a secure drive, then printed the transcript. I put both into an envelope marked for me. It was a promise that if I ever doubted myself again, I'd have proof of why I left, and proof that I'd never go back. I moved at the start of May, just as the city's trees were trading their pale blossoms for full green canopies. It was a clean break. No forwarding address to anyone in the old neighborhood. No social media post announcing my new chapter. I didn't need applause or explanation. I just needed a place where every sound in the hallway was unfamiliar, where the walls didn't remember anything about me. The new apartment wasn't extravagant, but it was mine in a way that felt brand new. Tall windows bathed the living room in light from sunrise to late afternoon. The kitchen counters gleamed, untouched by anyone else's hands. On my first night there, I lay in bed listening to the distant hum of traffic, and for the first time in years, I didn't brace for a text that might tilt my life sideways. I told almost no one about the move, just my closest friends, my lawyer, and my job. But the universe has a way of testing your boundaries just when you think they're set in stone. 2 weeks after I settled in, I stopped by a local coffee shop before work. I was in line debating between a cappuccino or just a black coffee, when a voice behind me said my name. I froze before I turned. It was my cousin Denise, the same one who'd texted me the night the police were at my parents' house. She looked hesitant, her hand clutching a paper bag from the bakery case. I didn't know you moved here, she said. I nodded slowly. Yeah, needed a change. Her eyes darted to the side before she spoke again. Your mom and dad, they're not doing great. Sold the house. Renting now. I waited, but she didn't say what I knew she wanted to. Some variation of maybe you should reach out. Instead, she sighed. They keep telling people you overreacted, that it was all a misunderstanding. I almost laughed. A misunderstanding doesn't come with a protective order. Denise hesitated, then said something that caught me off guard. Tessa's not living with them anymore. I think she's on her own. It was meant, I think, as a piece of news that might soften me. But all I could think about was that night, her voice calm and almost bored saying, she's out, before trying to drain my account. I thanked Denise for telling me and turned back to the counter. When my order came up, I took my coffee and walked out without looking back. That encounter stayed with me for days, not because of what she said, but because of how little it moved me. A year ago, I would have felt torn, guilty, maybe even tempted to call. Now, all I felt was distance, the kind that comes from finally seeing people as they are, not as you wish they could be. Still, the run-in lit a small spark in me, one I couldn't ignore. I didn't want to see them, didn't want to hear their voices. But I realized I did want something else, closure. Not the legal kind, the personal kind. So one quiet Saturday morning, I opened my laptop and wrote a letter. Not to send, but to say all the things I'd never spoken out loud. I told them I knew exactly who they were. That I saw every manipulation for what it was, every favor they demanded, every time they framed theft as love. I told them I'd built a life without them, and it was better, cleaner, safer, freer. I told them I didn't hate them, but I also didn't forgive them. Forgiveness would imply I believed they might change, and I didn't. When I finished, I printed the letter, folded it neatly, and placed it in the same envelope with the transcript and recording from that night. I sealed it and wrote one word on the front in black ink, truth. I put it at the back of my closet, behind a box of winter clothes. It wasn't for them. It was for me, a reminder that I hadn't imagined any of it, and that I'd chosen myself over their approval. That afternoon I walked down to the farmer's market, bought fresh bread and strawberries, and sat in the sun eating like the world was mine. Because in that moment it was. And I knew exactly who had given it back to me. Summer came in slow, heavy waves. My new life settled into a rhythm I didn't realize I'd been craving. Morning coffee in a kitchen no one else had keys to. Walks through a neighborhood where no one knew my last name. Nights where the only thing pulling me from sleep was the hum of the air conditioner. But the past has a way of circling back, sometimes in whispers. It started with a voicemail from an unfamiliar number one Tuesday afternoon. I let it go to the machine, and when I played it back later, the voice on the other end was flat, clipped, professional. "This is Officer Ramirez. Just calling to update you on your case. There's been a development regarding the defendant's probation. Please return my call when you have a moment." I called him back that evening, sitting on my balcony while the heat from the day still clung to the concrete. "Shirley," he said, his tone calm but with an edge that told me he'd been waiting to make this call. "We received a report that your sister violated the protective order again. We also have reason to believe your parents were involved, though it's less direct this time." I leaned back in my chair, the metal warm against my skin. "What happened?" He explained it in simple terms. A series of online inquiries made to my bank. Nothing that breached my accounts, but enough to trigger the bank's fraud alert system. The requests had originated from a public library in the very town my parents were renting in now. And while it wasn't illegal to look, the fact that they'd used my personal information to try to access records they weren't entitled to made it a clear violation. "What does that mean for them?" I asked. "It means they're in court next week," Ramirez said. "And given that this is their second strike, the judge may decide to revoke probation and enforce the original sentence terms. You don't need to appear unless you want to." I didn't answer right away. The idea of seeing them again in person in a courtroom stirred something uneasy in me. Not fear exactly. More like finality. "I'll be there," I said finally. The following Thursday, I walked into the courthouse wearing a simple navy dress and low heels, my hair pulled back. I hadn't told anyone I was going. Not my friends, not Denise. This moment wasn't for anyone else. When I stepped into the courtroom, they were already seated at the defense table. My parents looked smaller than I remembered, my dad's posture stiff but sagging at the edges, my mom's hands clasped tightly in her lap. Tessa sat between them, her eyes fixed on a spot somewhere near the floor. They didn't look at me. The hearing was quick. The bank's fraud prevention officer testified about the attempted inquiries, the protective order violations, and how the system had flagged my details being entered from a location linked to them. My lawyer Angela was there beside me, her presence steady but unobtrusive. The judge didn't waste time. He reminded them of the terms of their probation, of the fact that they'd already been given leniency because of my willingness to cooperate the first time. Then he revoked it. 1 year. County jail. It wasn't a long sentence, not in the grand scheme of things. But it was enough. Enough to make sure they couldn't reach me. Enough to make it clear on record that they'd crossed a line twice, and the second time they'd tripped over their own arrogance. As the bailiff moved to escort them out, Tessa glanced up for the first time. Her eyes met mine for a fraction of a second. There was no apology there, no plea for understanding. Just recognition. I held her gaze steady and unflinching until she looked away. When it was over, I stepped outside into the blinding summer sun. The courthouse steps were hot under my shoes, The air thick with heat and something else, a lightness I hadn't felt in years. They couldn't touch me now. Not legally. Not financially. Not in any way that mattered. And for the first time I realized this wasn't just the end of the fight. It was the beginning of everything else. The weeks after the hearing felt different, not just because they were physically gone, but because the mental space they'd occupied for so long was finally empty. It was like walking into a room I'd been locked out of for years and finding the windows wide open, the air fresh, the light pouring in. I threw myself into my work, but not the way I used to. Before, I'd overworked to distract myself from the chaos at home, constantly grinding to prove I was worth more than they made me feel. Now, I worked because I wanted to, because every dollar I earned was mine, untouched and unclaimed. Angela called me one afternoon in late July. "Shirley, I've been thinking," she said. "You should consider using this whole ordeal to your advantage professionally." I laughed, not quite seeing how. "You mean put survived a family heist on my resume?" "Not exactly," she said with a smile in her voice. "But your tech skills, the way you secured your accounts, gathered evidence, navigated the legal process, that's crisis management, cybersecurity awareness, and legal compliance all in one. Those are marketable skills." It clicked then, and I couldn't believe I hadn't thought of it before. I'd been so focused on surviving that I hadn't realized I'd been training. I started updating my resume, highlighting the security protocols I'd implemented at work, the digital forensics I'd assisted with in my own case, and the preventive measures I'd built into my personal and professional systems. 2 weeks later, I landed an interview for a cybersecurity analyst position at a mid-sized firm downtown, a position that paid almost 40% more than my current job. During the interview, when they asked about a time I'd handled a security breach, I didn't name names, but I told the truth. I stopped an attempted account compromise by recognizing suspicious behavior, preventing unauthorized access, and collecting verifiable evidence for law enforcement. The threat actors didn't succeed, and they were prosecuted. The hiring manager's eyebrows went up. "That's impressive. Was this for a client?" I met her gaze evenly. It was personal, and it taught me more than any textbook ever could. I walked out of that interview knowing I'd nailed it. While I waited for their decision, life in my new city began to take on a rhythm I actually liked. Saturday mornings at the farmer's market, evening walks by the river, cooking dinner in silence, or with music playing low, no one hovering over me. One evening on my way home from work, I stopped at a bookstore. In the business section I saw a title about boundary setting and money, a book I wish I'd read 10 years ago. I bought it along with a novel I didn't need, and as I paid I realized something. I wasn't thinking about them anymore. Not wondering what they were doing. Not rehearsing imaginary arguments in my head. They were still out there somewhere serving their sentence. But they no longer occupied space in mine. A week later the job offer came through. Higher pay. Better benefits. A role where my experience, all of it, even the painful parts, would be an asset. I signed the contract without hesitation. It was official. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building something. And the further I got from the person I'd been at that dinner table, the more I realized that maybe the best revenge wasn't just proving them wrong. It was becoming someone they could never reach again. By the time autumn rolled in, my new job was in full swing. I loved the work, the problem-solving, the quiet satisfaction of building systems that kept people safe. Every time I set up a multi-layer authentication process or locked down a client's data, I felt like I was doing for others what I'd done for myself, making sure no one could slip past their defenses. I'd started to feel untouchable. Then one Wednesday afternoon, as I was leaving the office, I saw him leaning against the brick wall outside the building. Mark. For a second I thought I was imagining him. He looked different. Thinner, sharper somehow, with a faint stubble that hadn't been there before. His hands were in his jacket pockets, and his eyes found mine the moment I stepped onto the sidewalk. "Shirley," he said. No smile. No attempt to act casual. I stopped a few feet away. "How did you know where I work?" He lifted his chin slightly, like he'd expected the question. "I didn't. I was in the area. Saw you come out when I was crossing the street." It was possible. The city was big, but coincidences happened. Still, every muscle in my body stayed on alert. "What do you want, Mark?" He hesitated, then said, "I just wanted to check in. I heard about what happened in court." They violated the order, I said flatly. I know, he replied quietly. I'm not here to defend them. He trailed off, glancing away for a moment before meeting my eyes again. I wanted you to know I'm sorry, not just for what they did, but for all the times I didn't say anything when I should have. I studied him for a moment. Why now? Because I'm trying to be better than I was, he said simply. And because you deserve to hear it from me. Not filtered through anyone else's excuses. His voice didn't have the slickness of someone running a con. It was raw, almost hesitant. Still, I wasn't about to mistake regret for trustworthiness. I appreciate the warning you gave me that night, I said. It might have saved me. But my life now, it doesn't have space for anyone connected to them. He nodded slowly, as if he'd expected that. Fair enough. I won't bother you again. And then, without waiting for me to dismiss him, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. I stood there for a moment longer, the city noise swelling around me. There was no rush of closure, no swell of forgiveness, just a steady certainty that I'd made the right choice. Some doors didn't need to be slammed. They just needed to stay closed. That night, as I sat on my balcony with a mug of tea, I thought about how different my reaction would have been a year ago. Back then, I might have let guilt pull me back into conversations I didn't want to have, back into ties I didn't want to hold. Now I knew better. I'd built a life that didn't rely on anyone's approval. And I wasn't about to hand the keys to someone who'd once stood too close to the people who'd tried to break me. Still, the encounter left me with an unexpected feeling. Not longing, but awareness. The world was smaller than I thought, and even with all my boundaries, pieces of my past could still brush up against my present. I just have to make sure they never got any further than that. The first cold snap of winter came early that year. I was sitting in my office, watching frost creep along the corners of the window, when my phone rang. The caller ID read unknown number. But something in my gut told me to answer. Miss Carson? This is Detective Owens, the voice said. I wanted to let you know your parents and sister are scheduled for release in 2 weeks. I stared at the frost, the delicate white patterns blooming like ice flowers across the glass. Why are you telling me? Because under the terms of the protective order, they're not allowed to initiate contact, Owens said. But occasionally in cases like this, we offer the victim the option to request a mediated meeting before release. Completely voluntary. Some people use it for closure, others to make final arrangements regarding property, financial issues, anything left hanging. The thought of sitting in a room with them again sent a ripple through my chest. Not fear exactly, but the kind of deep unease you feel when someone you've shut out completely is suddenly offered a seat at your table. I don't have property with them. No shared accounts. Nothing left, I said. Owens paused. Then my advice? Don't do it. They've already shown they don't respect boundaries. A meeting might just be an opening for them to try something else. I thanked him, ended the call, and sat back in my chair. Part of me had known this day would come. Time doesn't stop just because you've decided someone no longer exists in your life. But that night, as I made dinner in my warm, quiet apartment, I realized I didn't feel the dread I might have a year ago. I'd built something solid in their absence. They couldn't take it from me. Not without tearing through a fortress I'd carefully built, brick by brick. Still, over the next week, little thoughts slipped in at odd moments. What would they look like now? Would they be bitter? Defeated? Would they try to spin it as all my fault? The day of their release came cold and gray. I didn't go to the courthouse. I didn't linger near the jail. Instead, I went about my day as if nothing had changed. Coffee, work, a stop at the grocery store. I knew they were out there somewhere now, but they weren't in here anymore. That night, as I locked my door, I thought about something Angela had said to me early on in the process. Legal protections are only as strong as the boundaries you enforce. I'd enforced mine, and I would keep doing it no matter how many winters came and went. If they tried to breach that line again, I was ready. Not with fear, but with proof, law, and the knowledge that I'd already walked through their worst and come out on the other side. 2 days later, a letter arrived in my mailbox. No return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. My mother's. I held it for a moment, the envelope light in my hand. Then, without opening it, I slid it into the back of my closet, into the box marked truth. Some things didn't need to be read to be understood. I didn't touch the letter again. It stayed in the box with the transcript, the recording, and the letter I'd written months earlier. A small archive of everything I'd endured and everything I'd chosen to walk away from. Winter deepened, the city shifting into that crisp, clear phase where the air stings your cheeks and the night seemed to start by mid-afternoon. My life moved on without interruption. I woke to my own alarms, brewed my own coffee, and walked streets that carried no memories of them. Some evenings I'd catch myself staring out the tall windows of my apartment, watching the lights of the city flicker on. I'd think about that night at the dining table, the cranberry juice, the whispers, the weight of the blanket, and realize it felt like a lifetime ago. The truth was, it was a lifetime ago. The person I'd been that night had already died in a way, not in a tragic sense, but in the sense that she'd been replaced by someone who finally knew her worth and her power. In early January, I got a call from the firm's CEO asking me to lead a new project on fraud prevention systems. I accepted without hesitation. The irony wasn't lost on me. The very thing they tried to destroy me with had become the foundation for my career's biggest opportunity yet. One Friday after work, I walked past a shop window and caught my reflection. Hair loose, shoulders back, a faint smile on my face. And it hit me, they could never take this from me. Not the job, not the apartment, not the way I carried myself now. Because all of it had been built without them. A week later, Denise reached out again. They're saying they've changed, her message read. That they want to make things right. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. I didn't need an apology to validate my choices. I didn't need reconciliation to feel complete. Some wounds you don't stitch closed, you let them scar so you remember why you'll never walk down that road again. On the first warm day of spring, I took the box labeled Truth out to my balcony. I opened it, held each item in my hands for a moment, and then burned them one by one in a small metal bin. The smoke curled up into the clear sky, carrying the weight of a past I no longer owed space to. When the last page turned to ash, I stood there a moment longer, breathing in the clean air. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't revenge. It was something better, release. I went back inside, made myself a cup of tea, and sat by the window as the sun dipped low. My phone buzzed with a new work email and I smiled, already thinking about the week ahead. The life I'd built was mine now, entirely mine, and nothing they could do would ever change that. I'd learned the hardest, most important truth of all. Family is not defined by blood. It's defined by trust. And once trust is broken beyond repair, the only way forward is without them. Never let the people who try to break you decide how your story ends. And this life, this peace, this freedom was how mine would continue.